In China, young people are starting a fight that could hurt the economy, and the government doesn't know how to handle it. Young people are becoming more and more unhappy. This is called the Let It Rot movement, or bailan, and it's kind of like a quiet revolt. This protest is different from others that the government puts down because it's peaceful but strong enough to worry the Chinese government. A few weeks ago, police were called to big towns like Shanghai to break up protests. Protesters were arrested and brought away. Even though there is no bloodshed in this movement, it is very worrying for China's economy. When China is at odds with other countries, President Xi Jinping usually shows strength. But now he is pleading with the youth to stop this revolt. He is even trying to get them going by sending them words of strength. Plus, China has another issue that comes from a decision made 44 years ago. There are not enough young people to live in the country. The world's most populous country is having trouble finding people to work in its companies and in the military because its people are getting older. So why are Chinese teens and young adults so angry? What is this quiet revolt doing to make things so bad for the country? A Chinese word called bailan, which means let it rot, became very popular all over the country in March 2022. Weibo in China saw more than 91 million views of it in just 6 months, especially when you think about how quickly China shuts down trends that could hurt the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. At first, the government might have thought it was just another internet trend. But what happened next was something no one saw coming. I've noticed that my videos about China don't get as many likes. I think this is because the CCP's bots are probably trying to mess with the system. It would really help me if you could click that like button right now. Going back to bailan, this movement shows how young people feel. They have given up on life because they don't see any point in it. A lot of people have quit their jobs, grown apart from their families, stopped trying to be successful, and are now happy with just being normal. As it turns out, this wasn't the first movement like this. One of the most popular words in China in 2021 was tang ping, which means lying flat. But how did China get here? The anger behind bailan has been building for a long time, even though the music video didn't come out until 2022. It's the result of years of Chinese strategies. New Oriental Education was set up on November 16, 1993. This private educational services business did so well that it grew to be China's biggest private school provider. In the 1990s, private teaching was very popular. Some companies, like New Oriental, grew so quickly that they started selling shares. In 2004, before New Oriental even went public, the company said that China's education market was worth about 580 billion RMB, which is about $72 billion. The tutoring business was booming, creating a lot of work openings. At one point, China's tutoring business was thought to have employed about 10 million people. The whole world was shocked when China did something in 2021. It pretty much wiped out the teaching business. This move took away billions of dollars in market wealth. A lot of people lost their jobs when the value of big teaching companies dropped by 80–90%. It completely broke up a business that was worth $100 billion. In July 2021, China's government cracked down on the teaching business and pretty much turned the whole industry on its head. Tutoring companies were suddenly not allowed to teach required school subjects for money, give lessons during school hours, raise money, or even go public on the stock market. The goal was to make school less stressful for kids, but it ended up putting a lot of people out of work. New Oriental Education's value dropped by 83% in just 10 months. In the same time period, many other teaching businesses lost almost 90% of their market value. Businesses fired 40 to 50% of their staff. About 206,000 people lost their jobs at just the top 7 tutoring companies on the list. And that doesn't even include smaller tutoring businesses or regular classes. That said, this wasn't just coaching. Since 2021, China has also been tough on the tech and real estate industries. It was clear what was going on by 2022. Alibaba, the e-commerce giant, had to fire more than 10,000 workers, and Country Garden, one of the biggest real estate companies in the country, had to fire about 30,000 workers. Think about a mother who tutors to support her family, a new college graduate who gets a job at one of these now defunct companies, or founders who worked hard to build these businesses and then saw them go out of business almost overnight. Now, if you were an entrepreneur in this place, would you feel ready to start a business? Most likely not, since all of your hard work could be gone in a few months. The same is true for workers. They are left with fear and uncertainty. This deep anger is one of the main things driving the uprising in China's youth. But it's not the only thing powering this growing movement. China became independent in 1949, but it was already very poor. By 1990, 66.3% of the population lived in poverty, and millions of people had died of hunger. China's GDP per person was only $90 at that time. But over the next 50 years, something amazing took place. China's GDP per person had grown by 141 times by 2022. That's right, 141 times. With a GDP of 7.9 trillion, China is now the world's second biggest economy. Also, the rate of poverty dropped a lot, from 66.3% in 1990 to only 0.3% in 2018. During those hard times, older generations worked hard, creating a way of working in China that is still common today. People who work in the popular 996 style do so from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. To give you an idea, the average around the world is about 40 hours a week. China's labor rules say that a normal workday should last 8 hours, and that people can work no more than 44 hours a week. In practice, though, most people work almost 28 hours more than that. The tough job market in China is a big reason for this. Many Chinese workers feel weird or even bad if they leave the office before 9 p.m., though, because it's part of their culture. Indeed, this is what the younger generation in China is fighting back against. They've seen other ways to live and want to find ones that are more open. What if they can't do anything else? Imagine being totally worn out from working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, but not being able to quit. Because you don't have time for them, your health and relationships start to fall apart. That sounds annoying, right? Yes, that's how things are for many young people in China right now. Even though they really want to leave, most young people in China feel stuck in this bad work atmosphere. Why? The grim truth is that China doesn't really talk about it. In May, youth unemployment hit a new high of 20.8%, up from 20.4% the month before. The Chinese government said in August 2023 that a shocking 21.3% of Chinese teenagers did not have jobs. As an alternative to dealing with the problem, the CCP chose to fix it in the most common way. They stopped releasing the urban youth unemployment number. Is the problem now solved? This is why so many young Chinese people have to work the hard 996 hours, which are from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. There aren't enough jobs for everyone. It's tough, and for many people, quitting is not a choice. It's getting even worse because there is more and more competition for work. In 2021, 9 million new grads from Chinese universities were expected. By 2024, that number is expected to rise to 11.8 million. It's no surprise that more graduates than jobs. In China, more than 1 in 5 young workers are now unemployed. The high unemployment rate is partly because of the let it rot attitude, but it's also because there aren't enough jobs to go around. An economist from Peking University said that things are so bad that almost half of Chinese kids might end up without jobs. This includes people who choose to lie flat or stay away from the culture of intense hustle overall. Because there aren't enough jobs, recent college grads are taking on strange and sometimes silly jobs. For example, there's a new trend where they're paid to be full-time children and help their parents with housework. You could hand your mom a bill and say, "Hey mom, you owe me at least $500,000. Yes, it's a strange job, but when things get bad, you have to do crazy things. There aren't enough jobs, people are always trying to get ahead, and there's a movement against it all. Things don't look good for Chinese kids. It was really shocking to learn how hard things are for young people in China by looking at several case studies. Take Crystal Gua as an example. When she talked to CNBC, this 30-year-old woman told their story. China's crackdown on the private teaching business was the first thing that hurt her. It took her 6 months of hard work, but she finally got a job at a real estate company. A few months later, though, her whole department was fired. Since the tech industry was also losing jobs, Crystal gave up on finding solid work and chose to lie flat to escape the harsh reality. She used hobbies and part-time jobs to pay her bills and keep herself busy. Millions of Chinese teens and young adults are using the "let it rot" ban movement as a way to get away from things that are too hard for them. But this isn't just about stress. In China, young people have to deal with a lot of social pressure. This kind of pressure is called changlia, and it means to start a family and a job, which usually means buying a house. In China, having an apartment is a sign of social status and a major life success. What's wrong? Home prices have gone through the roof, making it nearly impossible for the normal young person to buy a home in a big city like Shanghai or Beijing. In fact, the average income in China is now about 12 times the price of a home. This makes owning a home feel more like a financial trap than a dream. When young people in China see these problems, they fight back. They no longer give in to the push from society to own a home because it's just too expensive for them. All of these things, trouble finding work, high standards from society, and property prices going through the roof, are really hurting morale. Movements like "let it rot," ban, and lying flat, Tang Ping, are not only going against Xi Jinping's view of the Chinese dream, but they're also hurting the economy. One way to see the effect is this. China's worker productivity growth used to be around 7% per year, but it has dropped to about 4% since 2021. Yes, that is a pretty big drop, and it shows how this youth revolt has affected many people. There are many other things that are causing this, but the fact that more and more Chinese kids are unhappy is a factor. It can be seen in numbers like the drop in retail sales and the consumer confidence measure in China. Given the high jobless rate, this drop is not a surprise. Young people aren't spending as much because so many of them don't have jobs, and demand goes down when people pay less. In response, businesses cut back on production, which means either more people lose their jobs or fewer new ones are created. This makes a bad loop that makes the economy even worse, unless the Chinese government does something about it. Then you might ask, so what? China can still sell its goods to other countries, even if people in China aren't buying as much, right? That's a good idea. In 1995, there were only 3 Chinese companies on the Fortune 500 list. By 2023, that number had shot through the roof and was the highest of any country at 142. That is impressive, but there is a catch. Most of these businesses, especially the big state-owned enterprises, SOEs, like State Grid Corporation of China, China National Petroleum Corporation, and China Petrochemical Corporation, depend on sales in their own country. More than 85% of their income came from inside China in 2018. And things haven't moved much for private businesses either. That is why if the Chinese economy slows down, it could be very bad for these businesses and leave them open to threats around the world. And you can already see the slowdown coming. You might be surprised to learn that China isn't just having a slowdown, it's also deflation. It's true that China is not having a problem with inflation while the rest of the world is. In July, Prices fell for the first time in more than 2 years. This was the fastest rate of decline in 15 years. Isn't it great that things are getting cheaper? Deflation, on the other hand, can be a sign of bigger problems in the economy. If supply goes up, but demand doesn't keep up, prices go down. And if demand goes up, but supply doesn't keep up, prices go down. In other words, China is going through deflation because demand has dropped a lot. Businesses and people aren't spending a lot of money. China, which has the second largest economy in the world, is having a hard time to boost demand. There isn't any other big economy going through deflation right now, which makes things even worse. Less demand means less production, which means fewer jobs and more unhappy people. But China is facing a bigger problem, one that is even more important than the economy, jobs, or GDP. This problem is so bad that it has been a big problem for many countries and is still a big problem all over the world. China's population problem is simply a demographic time bomb. Here's the deal. China has 1.4 billion people, and 280 million of them are over 60 years old. That's almost 20% of people. China now has the most older people of any country in the world. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and Italy are having the same problems, but China's is a little different. Many countries have low birth rates because it costs a lot to raise a child. But China's problem is caused by government policy. When the country's one-child policy went into effect in 1980, it had a huge effect on the population. In 1949, there were 540 million people living in China. That number had grown to 969 million by 1980. However, farming couldn't keep up with this fast growth, so there wasn't enough food. The government put in place the one-child policy to stop a hunger disaster and keep the population from growing too fast. But while the rest of the world deals with its own population problems, China's forced birth control has set off a demographic time bomb that is now going off with a louder sound. After many years, the one-child policy is now a big problem because it kept China's population in check for a while. There aren't enough young people to take over, and the number of older people is rising quickly. Chinese people will be over 60 for about 400 million people by 2035, which is about 30% of the whole population. That's almost as many people as live in Japan, South Korea, Italy, Canada, and Russia all together right now. Besides that, the strategy changed the ratios of men to women. There are a lot of social and cultural problems in China because there are about 35 million more guys than women. There is now as much competition for marriage as there is for jobs. Yes, you might think that if there are fewer young people, it will be better for the ones that are there. It's not that easy, though. There are many issues that can come up when the population drops. Japan had 20,000 fewer people in 2008 than it does now, but by 2023, that number will have grown to over 830,000. The leader of Japan, Fumio Kishida, even called this trend the country's gravest crisis. Studies reveal that when the number of people of working age drops, so do business profits, which hurts the economy in the long run. Since workers also buy a lot of things, fewer workers mean less spending. Japan is a great example of how an economy can suffer when the number of people living in it drops. China is having the same problems because its older population is growing and its young workers are leaving. Japan's domestic spending dropped as the number of people of working age fell. Also, the number of Japanese companies on the Fortune 500 list dropped by a large amount. There is a 94% link between the drop in the number of people of working age and the drop in Japanese companies on the world list. There were 107 Japanese companies in the Fortune 500 in 2000, but by 2023, there were only 41. That's a 60% drop. In the 1960s and 1970s, Japan had a birth rate of about 2. It's now only 1.3. To keep the population steady, experts say that the birth rate should be 2.1. Japan's GDP growth is also linked to this drop in birth rates. Only 6% of GDP grew each year from 2015 to 2023. South Korea is in the same situation. GDP growth has been about 2.5% per year for the past 10 years. Japan and South Korea aren't the only ones seeing this trend. Many other countries with shrinking populations are too. These kinds of countries have already grown very quickly, but their GDP could have grown much more quickly if they had kept their population levels the same. There are two key reasons why the younger population is so important. First, when there are fewer people, there is less desire for goods and services. This can slow down the growth of the economy. When a country's population drops, it hurts the economy in two ways. When there are fewer people, there is less desire for goods. This makes prices drop, which is called deflation. When prices drop too low, the economy often goes into a slump or decline. Right now, China is feeling the effects of this. On the supply side, fewer people means less work, which means less goods are made. Not as many people means not as much desire for goods, services, and housing. To put it simply, a falling population can bring down the whole home market. What's worse is that as more people retire, there are fewer people working to support them. Because of this imbalance, the government gets less money from taxes, but more money is spent on pensions and other retirement perks. China got it that the one-child policy was a bad idea and got rid of it in 2016. Beginning in early 2016, families could have 2 children. The fertility rate went up from 1.67 in 2016 to 1.69 in 2021, but it was still less than the 2.1 needed to keep the population stable. It was raised to 3 children per family in August 2021 in China. But even with this change, the birth rate only went up to 1.7%, which wasn't quite the boost the country was hoping for. The reasons for this are the same as in Korea and Japan, where low birth rates are a problem. Many people are worried about whether they can afford to have more children. Also, policies and messages that have been pushing the idea of having only one child for decades have made some people believe that having just one is the best choice. Things might have been different if China hadn't had the one-child policy, or at least had something like a 2-child policy earlier. The policy of only having one child not only hurt China's income, but it also had a big effect on its military.